Good
Hello and
morning.
welcome to our Christmas Day live stream. 6 hours straight of live streaming material coming straight at you.
Whoa,
You
whoa,
think we
whoa,
can crack
whoa,
6 hours? Wait,
whoa, 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 whoa. Jeremy, what are you talking about?
6 hour live stream, right? Christmas
No,
Day,
no,
create safe space for
no,
fellow
that was two,
vegans.
no, that was two days ago. I'm not doing that again. Certainly not this time.
But I just had 3 cans of Red Bull. I'm ready to go. Like 6 hours, let's do it.
Well, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll turn myself off after an hour. You can do the rest. All right?
I guess we'll just do the regular hour then. All right, fine,
Yeah,
fine.
it's the ordinary show. Yeah, this is part two of the 6 hours. So
I just tuned in a bit peripherally, but it looked like it went really well. And when I looked on the screen, it looked like people were having fun. And I'm sure, I mean, it definitely got a lot of viewership. I saw there's 20 to 40 people watching throughout the. You did what, 7 hours and 20 minutes or something in the end? 22 minutes?
yeah, 7:20. Yeah, it's terrible, though, isn't it? Like vegans having fun. Yeah, it was. I mean, like, the idea was to. I mean, the interesting thing is, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure um, how many of the recent vegans, as it were, who might be struggling during Christmas were there. Not many seem to make themselves known in that sense. But again, given the thing, they might have just been watching because there was, less comments than the people there. So yeah. So hopefully that happened, because we did try to reach a particular demographic, but whether we actually did or not, I'm not quite sure. You know.
That's a
Otherwise,
tough thing with social media. There's so much stuff out there to rise to the top when you've got a good idea like that. It can be tough, can it? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that felt isolated on the day, far more than the 20 to 40 people that were generally with you.
yeah, it's a question of whether we got to them or not. I was very pleased that Seb Alex was able to make it, because I know that he was really excited about this animal rights centre, and he'd put a film out, and I did make a comment. I think one of my first comments was that he showed the explosion that had happened. And it was really, really violent. It was amazing. So I was really pleased that he was able to make it. And yeah, but after that, I mean, that was a kind of serious opening in a way. But then we kind of got into the Christmas spirit, you might say, especially when Ronnie Lee arrives, of course.
Can be pretty much guaranteed of it. Well, yeah, because I think for today's topic, it's a interesting one. I know for me, and I think a constant thing that comes up for the animal rights show is this kind of welfare versus rights discussion, and the whole idea of new welfarism, and if incremental steps exist that are considered to be quite a quote win for animal rights or ending animal use. So I think before we get into that topic, we wanted to play a short video of around animal bridges. This is a topic that's new to me, and we can just kind of talk through this as this is going. But this, I wasn't aware of this. It's really quite a fascinating thing that they seem to be doing around busy motorways.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
otherwise they'd be walking across the road, obviously. And I suspect the people who built this, it was from a human-centric perspective to protect cars/humans from getting hurt, but it has a knock-on effect of helping free living beings too.
no, that's very cynical. You never know, but it is interesting. If you do an image search on whatever you do it on, you will find lots of these bridges, and they seem to be all over the world and everything. And then there was one issue about them that we were trying to explore, and we can't really see any evidence of it. But it'd be interesting to see what any of the people watching, if they know about this, because I was a bit concerned that these bridges for free living beings concentrate them. I mean, there's deers going over, etc. Right, foxes there, wolves, coyotes, that kind of free living being. So is that not just going to be a very convenient place for hunters to hang out? That's always been my worry about these. So
Well, I think that's a first for the show. You calling me the cynical one?
I
Well,
mean,
it is good to think of both sides of these things because you're right, that is a risk, and almost if it really is centering other animals, there really needs to be a ban to protect the area around the bridges at least. At least I appreciate a wider ban of hunting would be ideal. Just a quick hello to Deb, Nella, Kristen, Jennifer, anybody else who's joined us. Feel free to say hello in the comments. We're just talking about these special bridges built for other animals and kind of the impact that has. I think they're a good thing. I mean, on the surface, I think there's risks to them, like with any of these things, but it's better than them crossing, or like you said, also, I guess some of these are tunnels that go underneath the highways. Makes a lot of sense in a way.
yeah, actually, I've got a really interesting when this finishes. I'm going to show you a picture because I've got a really interesting one of the tunnels. Because when you think about tunnels under roads, you think about foxes, badgers, for example. But I've got an interesting example that just popped up on my search engine that I'll show you in a few minutes. But I mean, obviously, you know, is this do you think a recognition then of the rights of other animals, or is it a conservation thing? I mean, it doesn't fit into animal welfare, does it? Really, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's maybe is there a term for an accidental win? Oh, it's so great seeing these individuals up close because yeah, I rarely get to see a lot of these animals, do we?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And in a non-zoo setting, or an animal prison, it's a bit more of a observational type thing versus, yeah, imprisoning them.
You know,
Yeah, so if you share your bit, I'll drop that in when you're ready. I'll try to drop my screen out instead of drop you out.
Okay, here we go. I think.
Hello, Paul, joining us from Galway City. Yeah,
Hey,
yeah. So
Paul.
this is one that goes underneath for elephants.
Yeah.
Kenya.
Yeah.
So for Kenya, yeah. So it is. You're right. It is an interesting intersection because conservation-wise, and this goes into that whole topic of some species being worth more than others from a conservation sense to some because there's a fewer individuals from that species. But I think it is an accidental recognition of their right to, you know, a bit of freedom.
I do know that for very many years, the aforementioned Roy Lee used to argue that he thought that the national speed limit should be reduced to 20 miles an hour, even on motorways, which obviously doesn't sound particularly feasible. But
That might be a tough one to push through Parliament. But yeah,
yeah,
I hear the sentiment. Yeah.
yeah, a tough one to police as well. But I mean, the idea obviously would be that people would do that voluntarily. I know that I'm very conscious, you know, especially driving at night, and suddenly you see the sign, deers ahead, that kind of sign, and then you think, oh, blimey, some individual going to kind of bound out in front of you,
Yeah, and a picture we just thinking of it that some of you may have seen online is motorway going through the woods and basically saying, flipping it because from the human perspective, we think the deers are getting in our way, and actually we're going through their home. So it's thinking of it from both sides of it.
Yeah, there's a great meme, isn't there, which says, it's not a question of deers on the road; it's a question that we've built a road through their world, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, this was just more of an interesting subject, I think, to just get some conversation going. I mean, what would you say this is a good incremental step towards the recognition of rights, or just a bit of an accidental thing that helps other animals?
Well, it's obviously bound to be on the face of it. I mean, what I'd like to see is to see if there's any evidence about what motivated them to do this. What was it? What was the argument? Because presumably, especially if it was kind of like, say, for example, it was legislation that forced a private company to do this, there must have been some rationale behind it. So I'd be really interested to see what that rationale was. Because that might determine whether we like it or not from an animal rights point of view, I think. At the same time, like you say, an accidental kind of, thumbs up, if you like. But I would still. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the chat knows, why these things started to be built. Because on the face of it, it seems like a really good idea. But it'd be terrible, wouldn't it, to find out there's a horrible reason in the end, you know?
Well, human love solidarity gestures at least one potential reason for it is that it effectively, the hunting is considered as a tourism and economic factor, and that the bridges would actually increase the animal count. So that's kind of to your point. Even if they're not waiting right outside the bridges, it's increasing the supply in that way. So certainly not a comprehensive win.
Yeah, we ought to do some research on this, because I'd really like to see the rationale for doing it, and also what the actual on the ground consequences of doing it have been. For example, if you're going to get some arsehole there with a with a high powered rifle just waiting for them to walk up to them, then obviously that's going to be a real bad thing.
That's pretty much what hunting is, but that's a whole other topic.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean.
Pretty much just summed up hunting.
No, it's I mean, it's almost without being, trying to make a terrible joke. It's kind of like putting them on the plate, isn't it, for the hunters?
Right. Yeah, making it like and it seems like the general sentiment in the chat is that it's great, but it needs to be kind of parlayed with some type of hunting ban. And yeah, Michael's. How are you doing, Michael? I haven't chatted with you for a while, but traces back to my early animal advocacy days, actually, Michael and I. But just a combination of conservation and kind of the endangered species side of thing, and then that public safety side of things. If they are running onto the highway, it is from that human centric perspective. So it is kind of an accidental one, maybe for other animals.
Yeah, that was your cynical remark before, wasn't it, Jeremy? But presumably, unless the other animals get to know about where they are, then you're still going to get them, as it were, crossing over the road in between these bridges and tunnels and stuff. So how do you put signposts for free living beings going, safe crossing this way? I mean, how do you do that? Presumably, obviously you get to the routine where they kind of end up making those paths that they follow all the time. Beings like badgers will do that, right? The problem then is that if you don't align the tunnel or the bridge with an existing path, you've then got a problem which, the other animals might ignore it. So that's another, yeah. So I don't really know whether they have to very carefully kind of plan where to put these things, and that might need observation. Where are the free living beings crossing? And so that's obviously where you're going to have to locate it. But then again, that might not be a convenient place to do it. So there might be a few problems. But again, in a kind of vegan kind of animal rights world, we would go to those lengths to sort all that out, wouldn't we?
I was just thinking this is kind of like a micro example of what in this utopian vegan world, what we might see happening is kind of living side by side with other animals and not just kind of doing our own thing with irrespective of their stuff. And Michael's just talking about, say, sometimes combine them with fences along the road to kind of force, or I guess funnel, for lack of a better term, the other animals towards the bridges. So great points. Great seeing you again, Michael. Yeah.
Notoriously difficult for beings like deers, though, because fences have got to be particularly high and robust to.
Otherwise, they'll try to jump over them. You mean?
Oh, they will. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a confusing thing, and again, it's in their home, so it's understandable.
Actually, for many years, I've always said that from an animal rights point of view, the population of deers can be a real problem because they are quite destructive. And we do have the right to protect our food sources, and so you get that situation eventually where, hunters will put this against veganism. They would say, well, the most humane or respectful thing even to do is to shoot them, rather than letting their population grow to the extent that then there's a starvation situation and then a die-off, and then their population grows. So that's the kind of natural cycle. Now, that brings us into that, to what extent can we interfere with the routines and the cycles of free living beings? And it's always been a tricky area for animal rights. Animal rights theory is almost kind of ignored it until we got to, Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicay and that kind of issue. And so this idea of, negative utilitarian, we ought to interfere. for good, for the good, not our good, for their good. But it's a very tricky thing to do, I would think.
Well, it's just if you saw a little smirk as you were talking there, I was just thinking we might have another list for our debates, our potential debates, because if I heard you right, talking about humans protecting their food source by killing other animals, I might have to push back on that one a little bit. That might be an interesting chat for us to have one day.
No, I didn't say that, but the point is, all rights theories include the idea of self-defense. Now, you could say that the idea of self-defense would also be defending your food sources. So again, if somebody broke into your house and didn't attack you, but then started, taking all your food and everything, you would have the right to defend that. So it was in that sense that I was talking about, not.
Yeah. Fair enough. I've got this vision in my head of deers coming into the house, rummaging through my refrigerator, and okay.
And Jeremy always thinks consistently bad of me. I'm going to get the old 6-shooter out. What do you think I am? Vegan game? What's the matter with it?
Yeah, should we have a cage match? All right, before we get too far off track, the main topic today is talking about incremental changes, because I think as the Animal Rights Show, we're usually quite skeptical of some of the wins in the animal movement because they're focused more on treatment versus use. And I know I've been recently reading Rain Without Thunder by Francione, which
you bad person, you terrible person. Fans admitting that you even own such a book.
Somebody put the idea in my head. What can I say? But yeah, I think it does beg the question, as non-rhetorical rights-based advocates, is there such a thing as incremental change? And that's really what I'd like to explore here today. And I think we're focusing in on the ban of the consumption, so specifically from, I guess it's a vegetarian perspective, but not eating the bodies of dogs or cats. And the question is that ban in and of itself a win? Because in 2018, there was the Dog and Cat Meat Trade Prohibition Act. So that's 2018. And in the UK currently, my understanding is there's petitions being circled around, but it is currently legal at the moment in the UK to eat dogs and presumably cats. So the question is, if we as animal rights advocates pushed for that in the UK, would that be a considered a win, because we're banning a whole form of use? Now, obviously, dogs are used in many other ways, such as being forced to race, military, and lots of other things that we could get into. But is banning one specific use a win? So kind of two questions in there. Is it a win, and should we be focusing on that or leave it to the welfare groups?
I've always said that trying to regulate atrocities is very difficult, and I think that's still true. The examples that you give about the dog and cat meat seem to be pushed by animal welfare groups. I mean, what was one called the International Dog Alliance? I mean, they're not even the usual suspects like RSPCA or Compassionate World Farming or HSUS. It's not even those. It's more like other ones. And so in some senses, there's an interesting division of labor there, in the sense that they're pushing for something that presumably fits into their remit of welfare. And yet it might be might be an accidental kind of rights-based potential to it, or something like that. But there's another aspect to it, which is the fact that it seems to be, and looking at the North American thing, I looked at 2 different kind of commentaries on it, and also the British one. It seems to be that the idea is a little bit like cleaning up your own backyard, because really the real aim is to be able to criticize countries like China. But in fact, I think there was one quote that China said to a campaign group, well, why should we take you seriously? Because it's not illegal in your country, and you're trying to make it illegal in ours. And so they would say we have to do it. It's like a soft target. I mean, like they said that in the legislation, the British one, that it doesn't happen. I mean, they're banning something that already doesn't happen, which is an interesting thing in the first place.
Well, when I was researching the U.S. topic, and maybe it more comes to light after the ban, I don't know. In the U.S., there were documented cases of it still happening before the ban was put into place. So it's obviously not as widespread as other species of animals that I think we're all familiar with. I think there probably are obscure cases, and to me, I can't help but wonder: is it a bit of a foothold? Because it's more theoretical comparing species, but if we've got the moral rights codified into law, at least for one specific form of animal use, could that be used to build for to other species?
I think it's dangerous. I mean, I agree with Jennifer here that it sounds a little bit Singlish and sounds a bit welfare, but I mean, it might have this kind of knock-on effect. I think it's going to be precarious throughout. And in fact, we did see one quote we did see, which was that something like dog in this country, dogs and cats are loving members of the family and therefore shouldn't be eaten and stuff. And so you yourself said, Jeremy, well, so we're banning one thing and reinforcing the property status of them in another arena by the same.
It runs that risk.
Yeah.
Well, basic question: could we all in one fell swoop say we can't use dogs for any purpose? Or does it need to be done incrementally and say, okay, they're no longer allowed to be consumed, and then maybe another 5, 10, however many years, okay, no, now they can't be forced to race, and then on and on. And the so-called fur, hair being used for certain species. I mean, dogs are impacted by that, and indirectly.
Well, I just think that once you start getting into this arena of activity, let's say, it's a minefield, I reckon. And so I think to really kind of, as it were, stand for animal rights and abolitionism, you're kind of better off. In fact, just let me tell a bit of a story, if you will. Going back to Francione's thing, just so people can see. This is chapter 7 of the book, Rain Without Thunder, and it says rights theory, an incremental approach. And so Francione was trying to start a conversation, effectively saying we can have an incremental approach to animal rights so long as each and every step would abolish something. That's kind of, I mean, it's a bit crude, but that's basically what he's saying, rather than regulate it. And I remember getting into a bit of a row with Francione about this, because I said, well, okay, well, you've got a group like Compassionate Wolf Farming. They want to abolish the battery cage. So in that sense, are they abolitionists? And he said no. He wanted to maintain the label that they were welfarists. Of course, they are a traditional animal welfare group, Compassionate Wolf Farming. They were started by a dairy farmer in 1967, but they did want to abolish. I mean, when I came into the movement, that campaign was already going. That was probably one of the first leaflets I ever got in my sab van, was a Compassionate Wolf Farming thing, ban the battery cage. So they wanted to abolish that. Does that make them abolitionists? It's tricky, isn't it?
So specifically, what were they abolishing? If you can just...
Well, the campaign in those days, you see, the thing is, this is where it's a little bit like the hunting ban. Hunting has been banned in Scotland, England, and Wales, but really the hunting hasn't been banned. Deer hunting has been banned in Ireland, but really it hasn't been banned, right? But what they were trying to do with the battery cage was to ban the battery cage. Now, obviously, from Compassionate Wolf Farming's point of view, they are all for extensive farming because they're a welfarist group. So they didn't like intensive farming. They were okay with extensive farming. So they were a welfare group in that sense. And so, but that then got translated to banning the barren battery cage. And then the industry responded with the enriched battery cage, which was basically you put a bit of a material that the hens can scratch a little sheet of plastic that they can hide behind when they're laying their eggs, and a perch, a little stick to act as a perch, and then they call that the enriched battery cage. So banning the battery cage ended up being banning the barren battery cage, and so we've still kind of got battery cages, but now they're enriched, which are pathetic because it's
all
so
treatment, isn't it? It's treatment, and a welfare focus. That's what I push back against is welfare focused reforms. That I think is absolutely reinforcing animal use. It's saying, okay, do it in this way, but don't stop using them.
What I'm trying to illustrate is how messy this is, because they, in a sense, you could say that the compassionate wolf farming campaign to ban the battery cage had good intentions. It ended up that they banned one form of battery cage and another form took its place. And also in that process, the entire idea of free range became completely lost. I mean, like when I came into the movement, free range kind of meant something, whereas now it doesn't. So this entire process of going through these reforms to try and move the peanut along has kind of, because obviously the industries that you're trying to change and close down, they're not just going to sit there and let you do it. They respond and adapt to what you're doing.
Well, and they do it for economic reasons as well, which they might do anyway, as is pointed out a lot by Francione and others. Well, I think it begs the question, as animal rights advocates, should we be focusing on setting a clear ethical end goal and let the welfare groups and even, the businesses themselves, implement things gradually, and these bans like the dog meat and cat meat ban, let those happen, outside of the focus of our work, but as more of a knock-on effect. I mean, I don't know.
That's a really interesting. I think not to go to some of the things, but that's an interesting idea, because the work that I often quote is by Richard Gale. He's a sociologist, and the implication of his work is that you don't actually need that many welfare groups. The welfare groups like the RSPCA, who kind of rescue cats and dogs and everything, they're quite useful on that level. The rescue centres are quite useful, but in terms of, as it were, allowing or keeping the welfare groups to do the welfare campaign, according to Richard Gale, they're not needed. If there was a strong animal rights push, you get welfare anyway.
Yeah, just like setting the end goal of veganism, people are going to reduce anyway.
Yeah,
that's what we're really trying to do with the Animal Rights Show from since April. That's really just trying to inject that, isn't it? I think we're all on board with that. I think, or at least hopefully most of the group who's watching. Yeah, and I just want to bring it back. Dan's got an excellent point around vertical farming. So I think the whole idea of needing to defend our food source from free living beings would be largely addressed through future veganic planning. So I think that's an excellent point. And Nell's just saying that we're also attacking other animals' food sources all the time. Who's to say that a particular plant or crop is ours and not theirs? So that's an interesting one. Where do you draw the line? And also when we're talking about protecting food source and taking someone's life or violating their right to life, to use rights language.
Well,
to me, violating the right to life should take precedent over protecting one's food source.
Yeah,
I appreciate this is going back to an earlier thread, but just to catch up on these.
What I'd say to Nella's point there, which I do agree with, and I think it's a fine point, is that what humanity needs to tackle this issue is a big dose of humility, which we don't ever have when it comes to our relationships with other animals, and half the time with each other. So if we did have that would go to because we would have to ask critical questions. Like, for example, cash crops. I mean, I think cash crops are a vegan issue. And so if you're you wouldn't be defending coffee plantations against free living beings, because the chances are that the indigenous farmers, the human indigenous farmers, would need a lot less land if they were able to farm the rich farm, which is the rich land, which is handed over to the cash crops. This is why I think like tea, coffee, and sugar, these are real kind of vegan issues, because it means that we're using far more land than we should do, and all the indigenous farmers end up on all the shitty land instead of the best land, because it's people like Nestle and all those shitty companies that have all the best land in all these so-called developing countries.
I'm just wondering if the YouTube algorithm's going to pick us up for people looking for Nestle products. That would be great. At 29 minutes in, Nestle is a
Nestle. No. Yeah, sorry, I did wrong by mentioning their crappy little name.
Well, we're not monetized anyway. Don't have to worry about losing that. Well, I think your point speaks to Deb's because it is our encroachment. Because I think nature has a pretty good way of managing itself. It's usually our interference that mucks with the balance,
Hmm.
in habitat destruction and the rest.
Well, funny thing was, I actually got a Facebook message this morning, this morning, folks, and asking me if I was an antinatalist. And I said, well, I think strictly according to the definition, I'm not. But I was thinking, but I do have a position on things like habitat loss and human encroachment, which has obviously got ramifications in regard to how many of us there are, right?
It's a tricky
So,
one because there's definitely
yeah,
the numbers behind it, but it's also when you're out there doing vegan campaigning, if you're out on the street and also telling people not to have kids, it's a lot wrapped up into one short conversation, isn't it?
well, I mean, you see, the thing is, rather than saying to people in the first world, let's use these phrases, what we really need is justice
Western world,
on a
maybe.
global scheme, and so then you probably wouldn't have impoverished people having to have lots and lots of kids for financial reasons. And there's that old thing that education for women is one of the best kind of contraceptives that there is. And like if you were able to give them financial security as well, then they wouldn't have to have these massive families. But at the same
Yeah,
time,
there are lots of nuances. Yeah,
you've got to be very careful with that argument too, because well, it's all their fault, and it's very
of
difficult.
course.
Mm.
Yeah. But to the main topic, I mean, I think Jennifer sat. I believe this is to the dog and cat meat ban. That it sounds a bit single issue and to welfare, and specifically isn't a bit speciesist if vegans were to focus on one species at a time. And that's an interesting thing. Can we abolitionize or veganize campaigns by
No, but
saying we're campaigning for this as part of a whole big picture to end all animal use?
you weren't kind of saying that really. Well, you were almost like saying let the welfare groups who are speciesists do that, and we'd as it were the right side of things would carry on doing the animal rights veganism and all that, and let the welfares get on with it. Isn't that what you were saying before?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm leaning. But it does beg the question, do these campaigns actually have enough? Like, or you or I, obviously we can do a lot with our time, but if are we actually would it benefit us to spend a little bit of time to help drive some of those campaigns forward too? I mean, I think it's an interesting question. The chat seems a bit divided on it, which
No,
is
well,
it's clearly an interesting topic. Some seem to be in support of it, and others seem to think it's a bit of a you know
yeah,
bit of a wasted effort.
yeah, I
Well,
maintain it gets us into messy areas of trying to regulate atrocities, and that is difficult. In some way, that kind of the ban thing that you were talking about is a bit clear cut. But even then, you've got, I mean, there's almost like racist elements to it. That the real target is China, and they're just having to do this as a step towards having a go at them. So
which we've got plenty of that now with the current pandemic, post pandemic environment. Well, current pandemic environment. Because I think to Linda's point, I mean, beagles. I think that's a very tough subject to engage with, and it's obviously all species being used is heartbreaking. But if we ban their consumption and they're still being used in labs, is that a step in the right direction, or do we actually need to tackle all things at once? It's a tough one because I think from a legislative perspective, which I appreciate gets us away from the moral rights focus of non-rhetorical animal rights pretty quickly. However, it does seem to need to be incremental when it comes to legislative reform. But I think that's probably more going to come into play in the next 50 to 100 years as more meaningful reform is hopefully coming in. Maybe it's a bit early to be focusing too
well,
much on it.
as ever, you need cultural reform before you get decent legislation. I mean, the hunting bans are complete proof of the fact that if a species legislature puts it into place, they don't work. So if you're trying to push through these animal rights measures within a speciesist situation, culture, and all the rest of it, you're going to get speciesists coming up with legislation which regulate other species, and so it's no surprise then that they're full of loopholes.
Well, and here's Human Love Solidarity is just pointing out that a type of ban like that could be expanded to eventually talk about nature and prohibiting ecocide. And I think it could touch on a lot of different issues. And if it does build that awareness, it does seem like a bit of a hollow measure, though, because people can sign the piece of paper and it's only going to really affect, a few hundred cases a year, maybe in the US, UK, I don't know. Or maybe just a few dozen, I don't know.
Why does that? Why does that? The prohibition of the consumption of dogs and cats lead to that?
Maybe just the awareness of respect for other animals, and that I know that's happened for me because I didn't start living vegan for environmental reasons, but I'm a heck of a lot more aware of the environmental concerns now. So I don't know if there's a bit of a knock-on effect potential there or not. I agree it's not maybe super direct, but maybe eventually.
Well, just a population growth of ethical vegans and the fallout from that, and the change in the way that people talk to politics. You see, politicians are followers and not leaders. They'll follow the votes and they'll follow the money. When the votes and the money are vegan, that's what they'll follow.
And I think that leads to Elliot's point, which I think it sounds like maybe a lot of us are on a similar page, that we drive the strong ethical message, and we push for this, not having anyone killed or murdered. And then hopefully that has knock-on effects for the welfare groups and pushing for some of these other reforms. But it is interesting, is this ban considered a win, regardless of who pushes for it? They're kind of two separate questions.
Well, I'd like to make an anarchist point about this. Why do we need to ban murder? I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to have to ban when you think about it. Because
assuming a moral society and a moral human construction, which is obviously something we know we can't assume.
Yeah, but you see that's why the vision of the pioneers of the vegan social movement is so attractive to me, because they did have this vision of a new vegan mindset, which would, in a kind of anarchic way, be very reflexive. You essentially say at every given moment, I want to do X. Is doing X a moral thing to do? And so, then you would get all this reflexivity, critical thinking, and all that built in, which is what the pioneers of our movement also saw within their, what we might call it, their utopian vision of the future and all that. But I think it's interesting. But that you could even extend this to. I've always thought, well, why do you have to have speed limit signs all over the place? If we had moral thinking, responsible individuals driving the cars, they themselves, rather than some urban planner, would go, well, actually, this is a built-up area. There's kids around. Oh, look, there's a school. I better slow down. Why do you need somebody to say 30 for you to get that it's not a great idea to go 50? See,
humans are naturally we're focused on ourselves, aren't we? So we're just driving along. So it just helps to provide a little bit of a moral guide, helps to straighten up our moral compass a little bit to hopefully point back towards true north. But yeah, I agree, it shouldn't be necessary if we're thinking about others in addition to ourselves. Jennifer's just saying, isn't it a bit speciesist for vegans to only focus on dogs and cats when we need to focus on all animals? And I think there's a strong point here, especially when it comes to dogs and cats, because there are so many groups that focus on dogs and cats and not other species. I think it would be kind of spreading ourselves a bit thin if we're all of a sudden having ethical vegans focusing on these species that already have a lot of attention paid to them. So it does seem like we need to keep that clear ethical focus.
Vegan groups don't do that. It's the welfareists who do that, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of vegans, when I first started living vegan in early days, I was working at SPCA in Singapore. So I was technically focusing on dogs at that time. So, one could argue, options in Singapore were limited anyway due to the social-political environment, but, one could argue why you're spending time with dogs when you could be doing da-da-da.
Yeah, well, you've got very, very dodgy and disgusting things in your past that we don't have to talk about as well, so...
To be fair though, I think it's all entangled, because my time there really helped me start to connect with them as individuals. And now when I'm at a sanctuary with cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, and the rest, some of those same lessons I learned from working at the shelter do help me. So I think it's good to kind of follow our heart a little bit too, and see what speaks to us, and not be too kind of siloed into one line of thinking. But but good to be mindful of the big picture, I guess. Yeah, and I think the drug testing thing is obviously very relevant right now. We've talked it from a language point of the sacrifice of other animals from being tested. That's obviously a sticking point for us at the show. Looks like Vegan Gaze has joined us, which I know they were with you during your Christmas extravaganza.
Indeed. Hi.
Got a controversial thought from Dan here. If somebody is taking profit from the horse racing industry by winning more often than not, they're harming the industry. Therefore, consequentially speaking, it becomes a positive thing. It's kind of a form of economic sabotage if it could be implemented successfully, although I would say they exist for a reason, and that's because they're already taking, 10% of every bet anyway, so I think it'd be hard to make a sustained income that way, slash a sustained loss for them. But it's an interesting concept.
Well, you never win against the bookies, though, do you?
Well, that's it. They take their 10% or whatever. Yeah, Nell was just saying, I don't know if it is a win, but it certainly is the reasonable thing to do. If the killing of cats and dogs for any reason is allowed where it was previously illegal, it would be going backwards. Yeah, so it sounds like maybe it's a win. We just shouldn't necessarily focus our efforts there. That's what I'm kind of keep coming back to. Is that kind of your take on the situation in general when it comes to the dog and cat flesh ban?
Well, these things are more complicated than they look, because things on the face of it look, well, that's pretty reasonable. That's a good thing. But then again, as we saw from that claims making, they were just using it to reinforce the pet status of cats and dogs. Which is, from a vegan point of view, just another form of animal use. And so, it's interesting, really, because in some senses, I don't know. I was going to say, having kind of animal companions who kind of live for a long time, and they're carnivores. Then that leads you to all kind of, if we're going to try and do some kind of calculation or something about, overall deaths or advances or consequences. It gets into difficult areas. It seems to me. I think that's why, ironically, going back to Francione, I think that's why he rejected his own chapter, because I think he realized a couple of things. First of all, what he was planning wasn't easy, and it gets you into a difficult position. And he also thought, in the end, I think that the animal movement is just not sophisticated enough to have an adult conversation about it, because essentially that chapter in that book is a call for dialogue, which never happened.
So just swerve the topic in general and keep pushing for ethical veganism and focus on that and just let the rest of the world sort itself out? Is that kind of where you're leaning then? If I were to paraphrase what you just said?
Well, obviously we're back to that kind of truism that by creating vegans, you're creating people who are opposing all of this stuff across the board straight off. So you don't have to get them to be to be anti-zoo and then anti-circus and all that anti-hunt. Creating ethical vegan just does that in one fell swoop, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's got an interesting one that maybe we could unpack a little bit, is the campaigns to ban puppy mills instead of banning the breeding of dogs altogether. That's an interesting one, because that's a treatment focus in it, isn't it? To me, I think that's on the cusp, but to me, it should be a push to ban the breeding, to be a meaningful incremental change towards the recognition of inherent moral, basic rights to be respected. I think it would have to be the entire breeding, the entire form of use. I think when we're looking at one specific aspect of a use, that's where it gets into what you're saying, at the tricky territory. Because what constitutes a puppy mill,
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember as a kid, we walking into into an encampment, and there was lots of puppies, in this kind of like little makeshift kind of pen, as it were. And was that a puppy mill, or was that just a couple of families who got together and then ended up selling the puppies? We talk about 1950s here, 1960s. But also, if you ban puppy mills, but there's no critique of breeding other animals as animal companions, then what would replace the puppy mills? And would that be just as bad? You see, I think the welfareists would say puppy mills are horrendous, but what would replace them?
Yeah, and exactly. And I think I don't know if Elliot's response is in response to the puppy mill comment, but it sounds like maybe that's been discussed in the movement previously around a push to ban the so-called puppy mills. It does. It reeks of welfare and treatment focus to me.
You know, the point that Elliot is making there. Yeah, I just before we kind of broke up and got a divorce, Francione and I was working together on this issue. So I introduced him to Richard Gale. So he used to say, oh, you know, Roger Yates, the sociologist, and then he went, you know, some sociologists argue.
Coded language. Well, I think it is. I mean, a strong point, because to me it's kind of a coincidental. We're talking about dogs when we're talking about is that speciesist, but to me it's about the whole adopt versus shop thing. So to me, anything around dogs you would have, or cats, we'd have to attach that adopt don't shop type messaging, which could be an indirect way to stop the breeding, I suppose. But
that begs a question, doesn't it? I mean, like where are they coming from in order for people to adopt them?
Well, it's basically the demand side of consumer veganism. You know, if we reduce the demand, will we reduce the supply? It's a tricky one. And it looks like Terry's joined us, because they were with you for most of your live stream too, weren't they? From memory.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So it looks like you've got some repeat visitors. Disappointed to announce that we are only going to go for another 15 minutes, not another 6.5 hours. But I think that would get us to what, 2 a.m. or something.
No stamina, eh, Mr. Hess?
Yeah, I think just a side point to Linda, if the being has a heartbeat, their rights can be violated as individuals. I think that's a very strong way to look at these things. And I guess the tough thing is, from a legislative perspective, it sounds like we're saying it's a bit messy to try to regulate, as you said, atrocities or also rights violations, kind of to Linda's point. So do we just keep setting that clear end goal and then let it get implemented as it goes, you know, outside of our influence?
This is a difficult area. I understand that, and also there is, you know, in kind of welfare campaigns, and you see a petition come up and you see this issue come up, it kind of tugs at your heartstrings and everything. But it is a very kind of slippery slope into welfare, and you know, the more that you kind of jump on that slope, you might end up kind of going into areas that you don't want. And as I was saying, from even going back to the compatible farming example about, you know, banning certain things and ending up with something that's not really much different. Once you do get into that regulatory area, rather than the abolishing it completely, you are getting into a messy situation. You know, and also it takes many years. I mean, obviously, so would abolition, but then you know, again, a Francione point, you know, we've got limited resources. Where do we put them? You know, so
yeah. I'm just catching up on the comments here, because I do want to try to address them before we wrap up here. I don't want to miss anything, or miss too many separate points being made here. Yeah, I mean, to Dan's point, if all pointed, David Icke, of all people, pointed out the flaw in politics. If you want to succeed, you are required to agree and promote things you don't believe in nor support, if it's in your party's interest. And Ellie's just clarifying. Go ahead.
Politics is a complete nightmare. The idea that we as vegans can have any impact on politics right now is a bit of a fairy tale.
All politics is anti-veganism, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
at the moment.
Just watch Yes Minister on YouTube or something. You know, I mean, politics is a machine. You know.
Yeah, there's slivers of hope, but very few when it comes to from a animal rights perspective.
Well, I mean, all you got to do also. Sorry, Jeremy. All you got to do is look at what happens to the Green parties. They end up in coalitions with right-wing groups, or even if they just expand as they are, they get diluted. Happened in Germany, where suddenly all the other parties came out with light green policies, which was enough to buy the population off. robbing the Green Party of their kind of, their clothes almost. And so politics is a monster. The idea
You're
that
not going to push things through unless you form allegiances with other groups, are you? Otherwise, you're not going to have the votes.
We've got to change the culture before we can think about politics, I think. I mean, the one that I think is an exception to that is the idea of looking at subsidies. And I think the vegan community is starting to talk about subsidies the last couple of years, but I don't think anybody's done the research to find out how they work. And I think one of the reasons why that is that it's probably one of those situations where you don't know, and you'll never know because it's such a messy situation. Because sometimes people, farmers, for example, they will get subsidies to undo what they've got a subsidy to do. It's very, very complex. It's a minefield again, another minefield.
Yeah, and Dan's just talking about the policing one another into things as not having flaws in judgment. So basically, kind of we're talking about trying to guide people towards those moral things. This is an interesting one. So Dan's scenario about winning from horses being forced to race. Spoiler alert: he's an example apparently of someone who does this. So is it? Can you have someone an ethical position to taking money away from those industries? I don't know about that. You're still feeding it to the bookies and stuff, but that's probably a topic for a future show, as is subsidies.
Well, I mean, for me, I can't comment on this for one particular reason, which is I've never ever put a bet on anything like that. Even like the Grand National, which everybody's supposed to bet on. I've never ever put a bet on a horse in my entire life, so I don't actually know how it works.
Yeah, and here's a couple good comments around bringing back to the core topic of the dog and cat flesh discussion is incremental win, but hopefully very little effort was put into achieving it, specifically from a vegan perspective. And my mom's borrowed a line from some sociologist saying part of the scope, but not the focus. Just be specific that some sociologist is joining me right now. Yeah. Human Love Solidarity is saying horse meat consumption became illegal in America because of horse owners, advocates. Most do not care. So that's an interesting one where juxtaposed people who are still using them but advocating for one form of use to end. So it is incredibly messy, isn't it?
On that, if you read Gail Aizenet's Slaughterhouse book, you'll find that horses are still slaughtered in North America on a fairly kind of huge scale. It's just that they do it kind of on the sly now, and so they'll often have a second team of people. So all the slaughter workers go home, a second one arrives, and then horses arrive, and then to disguise it, they often then sell horse flesh as beef.
That's what Linda's just said here. Yeah. And I think to Terry's point, just focusing on a ban of breeding in general. I think if we could push for that of domesticators in Nibert terms, domesticated individuals in general.
Well, we're back to kind of social movement tactics again, though, aren't we? When we talk about banning stuff, we're not focused on changing the culture where you wouldn't have to ban anything. And again, going back to the hunting thing, hunting was banned, but no argument was won. We just ended up with a lot of people who still wanted to do something, not allowed to do that something. We didn't persuade them that it wasn't moral to do that something. If we were able to do that, then surely that's much more superior than getting a ban and forcing somebody. Now, obviously, you go, okay, well, we can't wait around to convince hunters not to want to go hunting. But if you ban them and they still want to go hunting, they find ways of doing it anyway.
Yeah, so you haven't really that's you force people. Yeah, you've got to give them the why for not doing it. Absolutely. Oh, well, I mean, I think just to clarify to Elliot's point, I think this is another subject, and this ties into the subsidies thing, which Deb's raising around the Vegan Justice League. The reality is we're all in different countries, or a lot of us are in different countries, and each one has its own nuanced political situation. I mean, I can speak a little bit to the U.S., you can speak a little bit to the situation over here, but in general, it's all very complicated, and there's no quick fixes, I think. But I think we should do a whole session on subsidies. I think that'd be quite good. Maybe get someone in who's studied a bit, or maybe we do some due diligence of our own. It'd be an interesting topic to unpack.
Well, I don't know about studied it too much, but Declan Bowens from back in the day, has been on about subsidies for years because of his farming background, and I think Harold Brown as well. Because in fact, when I kind of interviewed both of those, must be a year ago now, I suppose. They did talk about subsidies. So yeah, that's I don't even know where that I don't even know where that interview is now. It must be on my page, I suppose, somewhere.
Yeah, and welcome, Trevor. Just raising the point that the tricky thing with farming subsidies is it's also tied up with controlling of the land versus other industries being subsidized. So there's a lot wrapped up in that when it comes to power dynamics, classism, and the rest of it. But I don't know. I think we covered a lot. So it sounds like maybe we keep pushing the ethical message of veganism slash the philosophy of or idea of non-rhetorical animal rights, and hope some of these other things can kind of the peanut can be moved forward, but don't get too involved because it's complicated. We might be sending the wrong message. That's my takeaway. I don't know about you. You'll sign off on that.
Well, Matt, yeah, I mean, I think anybody thinking about getting involved with these regulatory things, you are getting into a bit of a minefield. That's what I think. And so even things that kind of seem on the face of it really good, you need to really scrutinize them, because there's often something, in there that's not so great. Regulating animal use, regulating rights violations. I mean, just think about the idea of doing that.
Even if you're banning a whole form of use, it's still very tricky. And what else are you reinforcing? Oh, it's been a great chat. Thanks for joining me. I know you've definitely hit a live stream limit for the week, I'm sure, for yourself. So I appreciate you coming back on Sunday to do more. So with that, we do like to keep the Sunday slot pumping. So I see no reason not to do it again next week. We'll chat about that and get that event launched at some point. But we'll I guess see everyone next time. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully everybody's having a good holiday. Be it with your vegan family or your family.
Next week.
What's that?
Are we only doing an hour next week, or are we going to go back to 7 hours? Or...
I say we try to do 8. What do you think?
Oh yeah, why not? Yeah, get his
But yeah, hopefully everyone's having a nice holiday and able to recharge a little bit so that we can, whatever 2021 throws at us, we'll be ready, hopefully. So, yeah. Thanks again. Great chat. We'll see you next time.